It's the first webinar, Life of Riley's first webinar of 2024. It's so great to see all of you here. Lots of new faces, lots of familiar faces. The title of today's webinar is Access to Care Includes Access to Dignity: The Positive Impacts of Racial Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Training, or REDI training on veterinarians, shelters, and people in the community. Some of you on this call, like me, may have already received your bronze level REDI certification and you're looking forward to REDI Silver. Or some of you may not have started the trainings yet. It's something that you're still planning for or thinking about. And there may be others on this call who've never heard of the REDI trainings at all, but you really want to start a conversation on racial equity or a learning journey around racial equity within your organization. So today's webinar will give you some information to help advocate for that type of learning within your organization, within your communities, and within the animal protection movement more broadly. So today's speakers include James Evans, who is the founder and CEO of Companions and Animals for Reform and Equity, or CARE. CARE works in the interest of human and animal well-being, prioritizes and amplifies Black, Indigenous, people of color, and other marginalized voices using narratives, research, and community-centered investments. The REDI training is actually one of CARE's initiatives. James is joined by Dr. Azalea Boyd, who is the Chief Veterinary Medical Officer for CARE's Urban Community Animal Care Program and the chairperson of CARE's Veterinary Advisory Committee. Also, Dr. Ray Taylor, the Senior Veterinary Medical Officer of the Rural Community Animal Care Program, and Dr. Luna, who's the Dean of CARE Circle of Learning and Leadership. So we'll link to the full bios for all our amazing speakers in the follow-up email to this webinar. And we'll also have 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of this webinar, so you'll have time to interact with all of the speakers. But I don't want to take up too much of the time, so I'm going to pass it on to James and his team at CARE to get the webinar started. Thanks so much for being here, CARE team.
Thanks for having us. And I'm remiss, I won't be remiss, but if you all don't know, CARE would not be here without support of Spring Point and Life of Riley. And I don't mean that in any small way. That's just absolutely true. So thanks for having us, and thanks for having the courage to help create us. It's changed CARE's existence, I think, has changed the industry. And so you guys are leading the way. Um, I'm going to share my screen. Is it already shared? Okay, I'm going to share it now so you all can see it. I'm just going to jump right into it. And I'm going to try not to take too long. Give me a thumbs up, team, if you can see my screen. All good?
Looks
All
good.
good.
Awesome. Again, thank you. And I'm so excited to be joined by my brilliant colleagues. Seriously, I have to say doctor 3 times here. Um, and I'm not a paper chaser, and I don't think paper is always important. But when you're talking about people, and specifically women of color, saying doctor first is important. At least it is to me. These women are amazing. With that, um, access to care includes access to dignity. Um, Dignity and equity are obviously very important to us. It's why we all show up to work. And we are going to cover, don't worry, the positive impacts, but I think we need to at least touch on where we are. Um, and that is not so positive. And there's not a lot we can do about these facts right away, right? So why is Vet Ready so important? Why is it so important to care? Obviously, we're in the business of equity. And to be frank, we want as many people to have access to equity as possible. It's not just people of color. Um, and so there are millions and millions of animals, companion animals, and there are not millions and millions of vets. There's only 60,000 so small animal vets in the country. So we're looking at, one vet for every 2,200 animals, and that does not count reptiles. So, you know, when you're talking about reptiles, and Dr. Taylor has one that she deeply loves, but that loved one she lives with has access to her. That's not true of a great many people that are home with reptiles right now. So this is really about, as much as it is about equity, it is also about just raw numbers. There are just not a lot of vets in the country. Um, Now, this is this is a visual exercise. Um, what does 1 to 2,200 look like? This white square is made up of 22 by 2,200 pixels. The red dot is made up of 1 square pixel. If you can find that red dot, um, you are amazing. You should be one of the super friends. Um, and yes, I'm dating myself. But that's what we're talking about when we say one for every 2,200. That's a visual idea of how few vets there are in comparison to folks that have pets. And like I said before, aside from just the raw numbers that folks are acquiring pets right this minute as we speak, with not a lot of support for those pets, here is the other side of that issue, in that those people acquiring pets and those people that have pets, and honestly, when you're thinking about adoption, those folks who we want to have pets to help us support the animals that are out there in our communities, this is what it's looking like. And obviously, these numbers are approximated, as it says in small print at the top. Um, if you look in the middle, uh, the country is pretty much half and half, um, white and BIPOC. But when you look on the left and you look at the number of vets in the field, um, there is a dramatic drop off. Less than 2% of vets in the country are African American, and less than 1% are indigenous. And that has a direct impact on the availability of not just vets in those particular communities, but access to information that's flowing into those communities about best practices. This is a look at the field at large, and this is a Harvard Project Implicit test that CARE initiated from the very beginning of CARE. Can you all see my pointer? Awesome. I love it when technology is actually doing what it's supposed to do. Um, so I'm going to draw your attention. This is somewhat obvious from the last slide, right? The field is predominantly white across the board. But this is a very interesting part of that survey. It measures the bias, and this is essentially saying that the field is 30%. Yeah, we're okay with Latinx, Hispanic people. We're not so cool with African American folks. But the thing we really don't like is poverty. We have a really hard time in this field uh, talking about and accepting that poverty exists, but that does not diminish someone's self-worth. And so, like all things, being human, it doesn't mean that you're one thing at one time. What happens when you have to deal with the fact that you are one BIPOC, and then also a BIPOC person that is living with poverty? So you're getting hit with an enormous amount of bias. Um, so in short, one of there are a combination of rationales and reasons for why we have found ourselves here. No less than any of those reasons is structural racism. And I've been saying a lot this year, what CARES is attempting to do is find a way to structural equity. How can we build equity? How can we ensure that equity exists in places where currently structural racism has dominated? Um, we are not going to be able to change this field overnight. We're not going to be able to add a plethora of BIPOC vets to the field like Summer over here, who is indigenous and amazing. We just can't do that. I would love to be able to click my fingers and find 1,000 more Summers and find $1 million to send them all to school. But that's a generational shift. Um, Summer is extremely culturally competent. So is Dr. Boyd. So is Dr. Taylor. But they're not representative of the field. The field, again, is 93%-ish white, and not and many of those folks are not culturally competent. And it's not because they don't want to be. It's because in many cases they haven't had the opportunity to be culturally competent because the folks that would be able to supply them with that information aren't proximate to them. They're not coming into their offices. Uh, African American studies, indigenous studies are not commonplace in high school, and it's not commonplace in college. This is coursework and information you have to seek out in this country if you want to have it. So not being culturally competent doesn't mean that you're racist. It means you have not been supplied with the information along your journey. And what CARE is here to do and what Vet Ready is here to do is to fill that gap. And so, as I was saying earlier, we're not going to be able to add an enormous amount of people of color and people who are culturally competent to the field by way of just adding BIPOC folks to the field. So, what Vet Ready is designed to do is to give folks in the field who want to be culturally competent, who want to be more welcoming, who want to be more inclusive, that set of information that they can build upon and they can get on that journey themselves. So I think there are lots of examples of why this is so important. I'm going to let some of the vets touch on this. But if any of your partners was at the last Spring Point get together of partners that I was at, um, one of the speakers spoke about a Latin ex-woman that lived in Texas who had a small dog that suffered from some matting. She did everything she could to get the dog to the vet's office, and she did get to the vet's office, but she could not afford the treatment. And mind you, the only treatment she was looking for was to get the dog's hair clipped. As it turned out, after she realized she could not afford to get it done at the vet's office, she turned to Dallas Animal Control, DAS, Dallas Animal Services, and didn't realize that the hair was so poorly matted that it damaged the legs of the dog, and the dog eventually the leg had to be amputated, which led her to incur a animal abuse charge, which then led her to be deported. And so this woman was separated from her family. She was deported out of the country. The dog's leg was amputated. The family loses the pet and they lose a mother, um, all because of really a deny of access and a denial of dignity. And so we have a lot of work to do. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And like I said before, there are a lot of positives about being more equitable and learning how to become more equitable. Um, it benefits everyone. More information, more compassion has never hurt any community of people. It has never hurt a business either. Um, but before we move on to those really positive benefits, I just wanted to know if Dr. Boyd or Dr. Taylor wanted to share any kind of real world examples from your own practices or journeys where you saw either the lack of access, cultural competency, or lack of dignity kind of thwart the healing process for families and or a pet.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, sounds good. So, yeah, I mean, all of the points, James, you made, spot on. And being a veterinarian, I graduated in 2008. So that's like going on, I'm aging myself now too, but going on 16 plus years, I've seen a lot of this lack of cultural competency in the industry. And I'm super excited to be a part of that ready because of all of the heartbreaks that I've had in practice. So a story, we have multiple stories, but one of the stories that I share that really hit people, it's a story of a Hispanic family who came in, and I was working on staff that day. The doctor who was set to see that client and that family, that patient, stormed out of the exam room shortly after entering and threw the chart on the file. Everything's electronic now, so I'm aging myself yet again, but threw the chart on the file and said, if you don't speak this language, if you don't speak English, you need to go back to your country. Um, and I was shocked. I was confused. I wasn't sure what was going on. I asked the technician that he was working with at the time, what happened? And he said that there was a child translator in the exam room and that the child was responsible for getting the information to the parents, and he didn't want to deal with that. So the patient didn't get care. The client's concerns were not addressed or heard, right? And so I think one, not only did it put the pet at risk, but ultimately it affects the relationship that that family now has with the veterinary industry, right? So the doctor failed in that moment, okay? But I also think from an industry side, I also think that it's important for the veterinary industry to also take some responsibility because the industry is also failing by not providing the support that staff needs to be able to navigate these situations of cultural competency and sensitivity. Um, and so we know that veterinarians, you guys may have heard, we have one of the highest suicide rates among professionals, and it's due to a multitude of reasons. But I think if the industry from the top, so the corporate leaders, the managers, um, they all need to be in support of making sure that the staff is culturally competent so that we can reduce some of the stress loads that veterinarians and veterinary staff may have. So lots of changes that need to be done, and there's many examples that we could give you on where cultural competency, um, comes into play. But that's one of the stories that I can share on that, and I'll see if Dr. Ray has a story maybe similar or different to that one.
Many stories. Would you like me to share, James, or you want to go to another question?
Oh, no. You go ahead.
It's so constant every day. So many appointments. To see that lack of cultural competence negatively impacts animals, it negatively impacts the team, and it negatively impacts the profession in the future, because these families or these children who are exposed to this negative interaction now will perpetuate that negativity in the future and will also eliminate their involvement with our profession in their futures and anyone they associate with. So it's a really cascading impact, not only on the team, but also on the public side. I see a lot of lack of cultural competence around death and interaction with animals. It's very much we are superior, the veterinary profession is superior to the clients bringing it in, and there's not a partnership. So these partnerships are critical to the outcome of the health for the animals. So often this is the only treatment plan, this is the option that you have, and there's no interaction. For example, I have a worker who works 12 to 14-hour shifts. They actually are in the medical profession, so they're a nurse and nurse's aide working in the hospital. And so the culture of their work schedule was never addressed by the veterinary team. The animal failed to have a success in its treatment of its eye disease and ended up needing to have an enucleation, which is where we remove the eye, because the only treatment offered by a veterinarian, regardless of, being in disregard for that person's schedule was, you must treat this animal with eye drops every 2 hours and there's no other option. And was never given that environment to simply ask, this is the ideal treatment, what would you be able to do? And that interaction simply could have resulted in a better care for the animal if they had asked why. What is your schedule? What is your capacity? And then they would have learned that that person's work culture didn't allow them to provide that treatment. So alternatives could have been pursued. So we're looking at cultures in terms of their work, their physical abilities. So clients who don't have the dexterity of their hands to be able to provide a particular treatment. We're looking at not only spiritual communities, religious communities that are cultural competencies that could improve the interactions with all of those people and result in better outcomes for their animals.
Yeah, that's amazing. And just so you all know, Dr. Taylor and Dr. Boyd didn't just fall into care. They were selected because before they knew there was a job opening for them at care, we watched these two human beings demonstrate what gold standard dignity looks like when working with patients that have less than. That's why they're on the team. And so if you go to our website and you see what the hummingbird says, you'll see Dr. Taylor doing the work with people that have the least, but with the most compassion. And so that's part of what we're doing with the Vet Ready process, is taking that thinking and turning it into coursework. And so there's so many positive lessons to be learned through the coursework. And it started with REDI, our first coursework. And you should also know that there are lots of companies, businesses, organizations that offer DEI training or racial equity training. But at CARE, all of the proceeds that we take in for REDI and Vet Ready go directly back to the community, and they go directly to direct care. So when you're paying for coursework like this at CARE, you are providing access to care for other families. I'm going to ask Dr. Luna to share some of the insights that she's gained from being such a pivotal part of the REDI team in her dean role.
Thank you, James. You know, I have been so lucky in my higher ed profession to have been around students who genuinely want to learn and are so willing to back up their convictions. Right? They've inspired me with their willingness to challenge the way they think, the way others think, also how others act, and they accept that vulnerability that comes with learning in order to move forward. So I see those same impulses in the human and animal well-being space, right? And those same impulses are also, I think, what REDI relies on and rests on and has hope for, right? I think that there are those who take REDI and there are those who live REDI. And those who live REDI, they see the urgency in the lessons that are attached to the course. And they know and also accept that what they do on the day-to-day, right, has an immediate impact on families and their communities. That's what I mean by living REDI, right? It's easy to take a course and be like, oh yeah, I got the quiz right, move on, forget it. But the ones who really do live it, they apply it, right? They fight the battles for equity, and in my experience, those who will take Vet Ready will also see that urgency and internalize it and be able to do that as well. Because I've, again, in my experience, I've been really lucky. I've seen nothing but tenderness, right? That veterinarians show uh, our furry family members when we bring them in. But at the same time, they're also treating human families. So it's the obvious direct treatment of the animal, but it's also treating humans. And I think that being culturally competent is a way of keeping the human in mind as well. And so I'm excited for the course. I learned so much from the course. Um, and it's just been so eye-opening for me to be able to work with these amazing, amazing doctors.
Um, so brass tacks, how are we doing on time? Um,
You have plenty of time. You have
okay.
you have more than 20. Well, if we want to leave time for questions,
Yeah.
you still have more than 10 minutes.
Okay, great. That's perfect. So I'm going to pivot to some obvious things. I know we probably have vets from the private sector on and some vets from the nonprofit sector on and the municipal sector on, and we know it's all different. But I'm gonna really lean in right now to the vets that are private practice, that have businesses, that have, people that rely on them to bring income in, because, it's important. And so I think if you are running a business and we're asking you to take coursework, the question is why, right? What's the ROI, right? What does this bring back to my business? Aside from the what it might do for me as a human being, what does it do to make my business better? And so I'll ask the vets that, like, what does being culturally competent, and let's be very clear, culturally competent and intentionally anti-racist, how does that improve your bottom line?
I think that that's very wonderful question. There is a reality of profit margins, and you have to do that. None of us, well, a very tiny subset of us, have the luxury of not needing to worry about making a paycheck. And so that's the majority of us. And not acknowledging that return on investment of your time and energy in taking coursework would be, an absolute disservice. When we're looking at a return on investment, we do have to shift to a little bit of lens, because this is a cost potentially for your practice in the terms of, sure, there's a financial cost, but there's a time cost, right? The time that it would take your team and your team members to take the course, and the time to work through those principles and establish some changes in a practice. So understanding there is going to be an upfront cost. That is something you would choose to make because of the long range return on your investment. So we're going to be seeing a return of investment because you're going to have an increase in your clientele pool. You're going to have an increase in compliance with a variable level of treatment plans rather than an all or none. So now we're increasing that opportunity there. You're going to have an increase in your positive interaction if you're measuring those KPIs for your clients. So those are going to increase. That also continues to increase your ratings, whether that's on social media or reviews on Yelp and Google. So that's going to open your pool. If you're intentionally working with communities that are marginalized, now that marginalized community that was previously unserved is now going to open that level of service. Ultimately, the more we open that to marginalized communities, the definitive endpoint would be that we're actually increasing preventive care. So these animals are getting care at an earlier intervention point, which is going to be more palatable, financially affordable, and that is going to access that care point to prevent the level of emergent or end stage disease treatments that are going to be low success. They're going to be financially cumbersome, or treatment wise are going to be difficult to manage, and decrease that presence of those interactions by increasing the prevention medicine. Again, those are going to be longer range returns on investment. So you're going to have a short range cost and you're going to have a long range return. That is also magnified within the team. the team is going to have an increased ability to actually facilitate help to these families and these animals. You're going to have a potential KPI if you're measuring your team's engagement with your practice or with your group that you're working in. You know, if you're in a shelter group or a public service group, that's still something you can measure, are those KPIs of engagement, increasing the quality of life. Now you're going to have increasing retention of your team members. We all know that hiring and bringing in onboarding is a really incredibly expensive project. By creating that inclusion within your practice, now they're going to be more likely to stay. So that is another huge return on your investment that you can open that door to. I could probably go into this for hours, but there's definitely so many returns on your investment that are actually measurable. And that's a critical point, that you can actually have a positive impact on your own individual well-being and the positive impact on the animal field, the animals themselves, and the people that share those homes with them.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit to that, Dr. Ray. Spot on, like redefining what your ROIs and profits are. I mentioned the high suicide rate among veterinarians, and part of that, when you're looking at research articles, has to do with the number of economic euthanasias that happen. And so euthanasias are the practice of putting animals to sleep, and economic, obviously, because of financial reasons. And so having a culturally competent staff and just understanding racial equity and being able to communicate with diverse clients and being able to ultimately save more because of that preventative aspect that we're now bringing in ahead of time versus waiting until we're getting into the emergency room, that's going to make veterinarians feel good, right? Warm their hearts, and then also, like Dr. Ray said, improve quality of life and well-being. And I think that, you know, for those that are asking, like, well, what does that look like? Is it just taking the course and we'll be fine? No, I think one, yes, taking the course for sure, but then also understanding what a culturally competent practice looks like. Your staff is going to be diverse, right? So you're going to have people from all backgrounds as much as you can, the veterinarians, the veterinary technicians, receptionists, support staff, right? Because I actually believe that we have the ability to learn from each other, a lot of this culture, when we work together, right? So one, that cultural sensitivity training is not just Vet Ready, it's Vet Ready and continuing on with our Vet Ready webinars and support, right, is helpful. Culturally appropriate communication. So language accessibility, those are things that need to be ingrained into the practice as well. Even something simple like the forms and the educational resources that you have. It shouldn't just be pictures of golden retrievers and Labradors, right? They might need to be other breeds because we're talking about breed diversity too. But then also the pictures of the word's escaping me, but the pictures that you have on those forms, right? Making sure that they're representative of the diverse pet parents that you have. And welcoming. It might be something simple as having culturally diverse artwork, right? I mean, there's so many different ways that we can tie in being culturally competent, being culturally sensitive, and overall, that is going to just increase well-being and job satisfaction for the staff, as well as improve the health of the pet overall in the end.
Yeah, but I mean, those are obviously amazing answers. I feel like I'm being biased because we work together, but you guys are awesome. Um, but I was sitting here thinking about how so many of us, I don't know how many people, there are like 50 some people on this call, right? And if we said we were giving away a trip around the world, right, free of cost, blah blah blah, and even if it costs something, most people on this call would say, I absolutely want to travel around the world, or I want to travel to places different from where I come from or different from where I am right now. And it's so interesting to me that when we take those trips to the Middle East or to Asia or to Russia or to Italy, we fall right in line. We want to find out what is the proper way to eat. What is the proper way to sit? Does one eat with one's hands? Does one turn a glass over when they're done drinking? Like we want all of that. We take selfies with ourselves being culturally competent in these strange lands. And I would encourage everybody to think about this coursework as that kind of trip around the world, right at your desktop. Better understanding what it means to be of color in the United States is a trip. It is it's an experience that enriches your life the same way as traveling around the world does. But because structural racism in this country, the worst thing about it is that it prevents us from talking about it in a way that that should encourage us to cross the line and see what it looks like on the other side of the fence. And I assure you, as a person of color from very little means, um, my community is beautiful. It's absolutely incredibly beautiful. And I think if you're simply watching the news, it appears to be a place you don't want to go visit on a worldwide tour. But if you want to be welcomed and accepted, in my world, you find underserved communities because they have nothing to give you except for dignity. So with that, I'm gonna ask if there are any questions.
Um, James, while people are thinking of their questions, I wanted to jump in. So there was a REDI training that was already offered, not specific to veterinarians, but that was offered to people in the sheltering community. And you can answer this question. People on this call can answer this question if they've taken the training. I was wondering if you could tell us, just give us some stories or some information on what was the impact of that training on the ability of shelters to serve pets and families in their communities. Have you heard any stories about that?
I've heard lots of stories, and excuse me, a few of them you'll find on. So don't get it confused. We have a Vet Ready page on the website. We also have a Ready page on the website, and on our website under Ready, there are testimonials from folks who have already taken the course. Um, and one of the largest organizations that shared the coursework and provided it to their shelter partners is Pet Finder. So if you can go to Pet Finder's website and also find REDI testimonials, and I'm when I say testimonials, I mean in the 25 or 50. But what it appeared to there were stories, everything from foster programs that immediately improved their numbers. I think it's Ohio Humane, Jen, you can correct me, but I believe they said they went up 30% or so in their foster program and adoption program. They created a internal REDI committee which reviewed all of their adoption applications, and it worked. I mean, they said that REDI did for them more than any other advertising had ever done for attempting to adopt animals out. But there are a litany of stories like that. I know there's got to be a hard question out there. These are super smart ladies. Let's challenge them.
All right, I'm going to challenge you. And this is for any of you. Or hold on, let me check to make sure that no one has a question yet. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. What is it? You talked about it's great to take the the Vet Ready training, but you've got to stay on top of it. You actually have to make some actionable changes within your veterinary practice. So can you talk about what that looks like? a little, you talked about language accessibility. You gave us a number of really great examples, but could you give us a couple of more examples of what that looks like on a day-to-day basis in a vet practice?
Well, I'm not answering that.
The goal of the training is mostly to increase your awareness. And there's a part of this training that is talking about options for you as a team. And that has to come from within. Like, that's the strength of your particular place, and the nuances are only what that particular group will know. And it can be picking one thing to champion and to start a cascade. It is we're going to champion our languages because that's something our practice sees. And that may be doing those different types of instructions or permissions and all of that in that practice. It could be euthanasia, like how your team reacts to those euthanasias. I've had examples where constantly within our profession, we regard euthanasia as the only option. And for a family to not agree with that is they're wrong. They're making the worst decision possible. They're not advocating for their pet. We are the only ones that have the right answer. Instead of realizing that one change that negatively impacts us as a profession, we don't like doing it. It's not an enjoyable experience. But we could actually partner with families who also don't agree with that and respect that that is an option. We could train our teams about what natural death looks like and how to support that. Since we as humans, strangely, are more humane to another species that we aren't offering to our own species. So it's a very interesting dynamic that we as a culture of humans have imposed that on animals. So picking that topic, for example, might be something that we engage in as a practice. And that is really the unique part of this, is it's a self-awareness journey. It is not all and done. We can't possibly make every wonderful change all at once. That's not realistic. But it's picking something and making a positive impact that affects you the most, and increasing that awareness and starting on that journey. And that really aligns with our profession as a whole. Our profession believes in continuing education. It believes in progress. So this is putting it in action in a way that might be more relevant outside of technical skills alone. And I do see there's a couple questions in the chat.
There's a couple questions, so I'm going to read them out. There's a question from Nina, and she asks, when you are a law enforcement agency, how do you balance welfare concerns with equity considerations?
That's a whole talk by itself. I'm going to challenge Nina with a example, and I'm also, we have some incredibly experienced people on with care, like Trey Law, with exactly that type of experience. But I want to see if we can get a specific example, because that's a very broad question.
Nina, can you unmute yourself?
Hi, thank you very much for answering the question. So, for example, I guess we can use the one that was brought up earlier by James with the little dog who was so maddened that the dog lost its leg. Like, I fully understand if an animal is coming in and, they've got mats and, an ear infection, that's something that, a reasonable person is not necessarily going to fully understand or have access to addressing. But if mats are so severe that an animal requires a leg amputation, that's a hard thing to just say, hey, we'll get you grooming as a tool, as a law enforcement entity. Because if we interacted with this person out in the community, in most cases, we would be issuing some sort of citation. So how do we look at these cases to make sure that we are really providing people with what they need, but also still paying attention to the laws that we are here to enforce?
No, that makes sense. And obviously, when you're law enforcement, you are not always able to make choices that you might, as a person, like to make because you have a job to do. That happens to me every day. There are lots of people I'd love to give, $100 to, but I got to record it and I got to make sure it's okay with, our granting. I have to make sure it's okay with the board and blah, blah, blah. I get it. I think the struggle is not so much that what happened to her on the law enforcement side, which I think there's room in law enforcement to make accountabilities for individual people. And I think that's part of the problem with our law enforcement system is that it is exactly that, a system. And ultimately, no one benefited from the punishment imposed on this woman. But I think the reality of the story is that the woman started at the veterinary office. She started with trying to obtain access to care. The problem is that access to care is so expensive that what you're pushing people out of solutions, and then that leads to unfortunate harm to the animal that then can lead to unfortunate law enforcement issues. So part of the reason, and I was going to mention this after the vets were done with their statement, is that in communities of color, many communities of color are afraid of doctors, period, and for good reason. If you are not, again, adept with racial studies, particularly as they pertain to brown women, much of what we know about medicine, human medicine, came at a direct result from doing horrific experiments on women of color and of men of color. And we're not just talking about, the common ones. We're talking, imagine, and I'm not going to talk about it on this call. You can look it up yourself, but uh, the level of torture that has been endured by women of color and men of color is just horrendous. And those stories are told and retold within communities of color, and they're terrifying. And so that fear of medicine is real, and it transcends to one's pets. And so what we're trying to say with REDI is when someone walks in the door and you know that you have no awareness, you have no understanding of people of color and their history with the medical field, then you need to be more aware, get yourself educated so that you can be sensitive to topics that you may not know much about. Why? So that we can get folks the care that they need that doesn't lead to further injury and harm that could lead to law enforcement. And in my mind, law enforcement should always be the last absolute result, because why use a sledgehammer when you can push the tack in the wall yourself? And so law enforcement should be for people who are, in my mind, are intentionally attempting to hurt an animal, not for a woman that simply can't afford to clip her own dog's hair.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, James, really quick because I have personal experiences. It's a good call out to say most people start at the veterinary hospital. And a lot of people, one, there's medical distrust, but there's also like shame, right? And so people walk in already with their heads hung really low because they're afraid of being judged. They know that the bill is going to be expensive. And some people will actually wait weeks to save up enough money just to get to the vet. And by the time the client comes in with now they have $500 or $1,000, but their dog looks thin. Some of my colleagues have said, hey, we need to call animal control, right? And referencing what James says, it really should be the last option. They now saved $800 and they're saying, hey, I've been doing this savings for the past 3 to 4 weeks. What can we do, right? They didn't come in before because they knew it was going to be expensive, or they didn't come in before because they thought that they were going to be judged based on what they had or didn't have. That happens all the time. And so then they resort to home remedies or home clippers potentially in this situation. And clippers are not always the best. But, I think that there's more to answer in relation to that question on the back end. But if we're starting on the front end, the idea is that we're preventing those encounters from happening and preventing animal control and police from being the option at that point. So
I am going to pick as many more questions as I can. Thank you, Dr. Boyd and James, for answering that first question. Jody asks, are there examples of financial policies for veterinary hospitals that help complement or support a shift in how practices engage and support people who can't afford their pets' needs?
So I am going to try to answer this question. I think I understand it. Basically, is there financial help for people who need money for access to care? The answer to that is, as an industry, no. There's not a lot of help out there. Most facilities will not do payment plans. They will not set up payment arrangements, which is a little bit heartbreaking because a lot of times with economic euthanasias or even pet surrenders, you know, if people don't have the money, then what this establishment will say, well, is if you don't have $500 to fix, let's just say this skin mask, why don't you go ahead and surrender your pet over to the hospital? And then someone from the hospital will put it on their essentially their payment plan, right? With a reduced discount because they work at the hospital. So but the idea is wanting to keep pets with families. And so if we're talking about that type of financial assistance, there's care credit, which is a credit line, there's scratch pay, but outside of credit options, there's really not a lot that's offered to clients. I'll say that I do know that there are some newer things, nonprofit model, subsidized care type discussions going around, but I can't speak 100% on that.
And we're obviously trying to grow direct care, which obviously these courses help to pay for. I see Brad Shear in front of me and makes me sorry, Brad, I don't mean to call you out, but Powder League is you know, a shining light in this I think awareness of why REDI is so important. I don't know if you I know I'm catching you off guard. I'm sorry, but if you have any words you want to share with the group about what you all have been getting out of REDI and now REDI Silver, um, by all means.
Yeah, so our entire staff did REDI Bronze, which was really a great experience for us because, I mean, one, it brought us together with into a common place of understanding and desire to do better than we've done and to change. I think in terms of adoptions, we were already in a very good place, but I think in terms of community engagement, we were not where we should have been and wanted to be. And so now a large portion of us have started Silver, which is a much more intensive class, but has been a great experience. And I was actually talking to Dr. Luna today about, because she has, if you take REDI Silver, you also get private office hours with Dr. Luna, which is an enormous benefit. So I recommend that. And we were talking about law enforcement, and I have a history in animal law enforcement. And when I heard this conversation, I just thought, you know, what's our end goal is for animals to be loved and with the people who care for them. So for years, I was in a work like most of us did in a shelter model where an animal needed care. So they surrendered them to us and we found them a new home, but we provided the veterinary care anyway. And so, you know, we took on the expense of the veterinary care and we didn't get anything out of it, compensation. And then that we had to hold that animal and care for them for weeks and weeks until we found them a new home when they were at a place where they were loved. And I think it's really time for all of us to try to turn that model upside down and say, let's just assume this animal's going to get the care they need. And if we assume that, then what's the best place for the animal to be? From the animal's perspective, is it someplace totally new? Or is it the place they've been for their lives and been loved and cared for? And I think the problem we've had in our work is that we have said, well, if you don't groom your pet properly, then you're no good. You're not good, right? You're bad. You're bad. You're not like me in the way I take care of my pet, and therefore I should find somebody else. From the animal's perspective, I think it's the wrong thing. And from our perspective, we're doing that care anyway. So, you know, we want to keep those families together. And once you see people for their strengths and who they are and the love they all have for their pets, then it changes your perspective. Because to us, that animal's getting that care either way. So you could do that in the field as an animal control officer, right? You're taking the animal, they're not groomed, you're going to take them back to the shelter and groom them and then give them to somebody else. Why not just let them stay where they are.
Absolutely. I see Ray Williams. I see your hands flying over there, girl. I know.
I'm stressed out. I'm like, yeah, keep the families together. Keep the families together. That's what we care about. That's what we want. It's cheaper, is smarter, is the right thing to do, you know,
Tell
instead
us
of
why
now.
you know all of that, Ray.
Oh, hi. My name is Ray. I am the Senior Director of Community Animal Care. I spent mostly all my life in animal control. So I know these stories really well, and you know, I changed my work even before I got to care, just to fight back. And I was like looking people up on Facebook. You don't have an ID, you know, I was doing anything that I can to kind of keep families together because that is our priority. This influx of animals in shelters is a direct response to the people's situations right now. So like just use that energy and then to support the families that already love these animals, love these pets, just give them what they need.
And so that this is part, all of you, why I love this team, because it's 24 people that have been around the world. This coursework is not being created in a bubble. It Ready Silver and Vet Ready and the other Ready coursework, they are an amalgamation of what this whole team has learned about people and keeping people and pets together. So it is unlike, I would say, any other coursework out there, because of the people behind it, not just because we're just honestly taking advantage of the fact that DEI and racial equity, everyone's talking about it. And if there were more people doing it versus talking about it and trying to sell it, we'd all be in a better place. But this is about living ready and not just taking ready. And so we're just excited to share mostly what our lived experiences are, because what else are we going to do with it except share those insights?
Thank you so much, James, and Doctors Boyd, Taylor, and Luna for that incredible presentation, and also for just all of the work that CARE does to highlight the link between human and animal well-being. And as James, as you so eloquently put it, to help us find our way towards structural equity. Such big fans of your work. Thank you all for being here today. You'll be receiving an email with the link to the recording of this presentation, as well as some other really great resources that CARE has put together for you. There were lots of great responses to your questions in the chat box as well, so I think that you'll get that information also along with the recording of the webinar. And I hope you'll join us for our next webinar, which is on March 21st, when Humane Action Pittsburgh will share how they're advancing animal protection by operating programs that benefit both people and animals in their communities. So same theme, very different organization, but also kind of holding fast to this idea that the well-being of animals is deeply connected to the well-being of our human friends and families. So you'll find the registration link for that webinar in your follow-up email as well, and also on our website, which is lor.dog/webinars. Thank you so much to our presenters today. You're all just incredible people, and thank you to everyone who joined us. I really appreciate it. It was great seeing you, and I hope to see you next month. Thanks, everyone. Bye.